It was one of those cloudy mornings when the city looked half asleep. The streets of downtown Chicago were wet from early rain, and the glass windows of the tall buildings shimmered like mirrors under a gray sky. Inside one of the city's oldest hotels, the lobby was quiet except for the sound of coffee cups and soft footsteps on marble floors. In the corner of the hotel restaurant, a young waitress adjusted her apron and tied her hair into a loose ponytail. She had been on her feet since sunrise, moving from table to table, carrying trays, taking orders, and greeting guests with the same calm smile she always wore. Most people barely noticed her, but she noticed everything. She had a way of seeing the smallest details. How someone stirred their tea when they were nervous. How a couple sat silently when they were upset. How the same business guests came every Monday, always asking for the same corner table. Her name was Lily, and she had worked there for almost 3 years. It wasn't the job she dreamed of, but it paid her rent and helped her cover her college classes. She studied music at a small community college nearby, though lately she'd been too tired to practice much. Her days started early and ended late, and by the time she got home, her fingers barely had the strength to touch piano keys. Still, she never complained. She liked the quiet moments of her work, the sound of plates clinking, the warm smell of coffee, and the steady rhythm of people coming and going. The hotel was her second home, even if it was filled with strangers. That morning, though, she could sense something different in the air. The manager was walking faster than usual, checking every table twice, whispering to the kitchen staff in a sharp tone. The waiters were polishing glasses nervously, and even the bellboys seemed tense. Something big was happening. Lily carried a tray of pastries past the reception when she overheard the front desk clerk whisper to another staff member, "It's today. The business meeting. The 2 tech companies are here. The deal's worth billions." Lily didn't know much about business, but she could tell it was serious. The hotel had prepared for this meeting for weeks. The executives were expected to have lunch in the restaurant, and everything had to be perfect. Every napkin folded, every chair aligned, every plate spotless around noon. Expensive cars began pulling up outside. Men and women in suits stepped out, some talking on phones, others quietly scrolling through tablets. Their faces were focused and tense. The manager rushed to greet them, bowing slightly as he led them to the private dining section. From the kitchen, Lily could see the room through the glass partition. The long wooden table was set with crystal glasses, shining silverware, and tall white candles. Even the piano in the corner had been dusted and polished, though no one ever played it. It was mostly decoration, a symbol of elegance. Lily was assigned to serve water and clear empty dishes. She moved quietly, staying out of the way. The executives spoke in low voices, their tone firm but polite. She didn't understand their conversation, but she could sense the weight of it. Every pause felt heavy, every word careful. After about 20 minutes, one of the assistants whispered something to the manager. A few seconds later, the lights flickered. The sound of soft background music stopped. The air conditioner went quiet. The restaurant fell into silence. Everyone looked up. The manager froze, his eyes wide. "Just a moment, sir," he said quickly, trying to stay calm. He signaled to the maintenance staff, who rushed to the back to check the system. Lily stood still, holding a tray, unsure whether to move or wait. The guests looked around, annoyed. One man tapped his watch impatiently. Another sighed and leaned back in his chair. It wasn't just the lights, the entire atmosphere had changed. The room felt colder, heavier. After a few minutes, the lights came back on, but the music didn't. The soft piano notes that had filled the background were gone, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Conversations turned stiff. The smiles disappeared. One of the executives whispered something that made the others frown. The manager, trying to fix the mood, turned to Lily and said quietly, "Go clear those tables by the window. Please." She nodded and began picking up plates and glasses, keeping her head down. But as she worked, she couldn't help overhearing snippets of the conversation again. "I told you the valuation was too high. We've already wasted months on this. Maybe we should reschedule. It's not the right time." Their voices carried the kind of disappointment that even someone outside the business world could understand. The meeting was falling apart. Lily placed the tray on the service cart and looked around. The room felt colder than before, the air thick with tension. She noticed how everyone avoided eye contact now. pretending to read papers or sip water. It was clear. Whatever deal they were discussing was slipping away. Her eyes wandered to the piano in the corner. Its black surface reflected the soft light above, untouched and silent. She felt something stir inside her. She hadn't played in weeks, maybe months. Work and life had taken over everything. But right then, as she looked at that piano, she felt a strange pull, like the instrument itself was calling her name. She hesitated, glancing at her manager. He was busy talking to the chef near the door, too distracted to notice her. Her heart began to race. She walked slowly toward the piano, her fingers trembling slightly. Maybe it was a bad idea. Maybe she'd get fired for even trying. But something told her it was worth it. When she reached the piano bench, she sat down quietly and pressed one key. The soft sound echoed gently through the room. Nobody turned. She pressed another, then another. Before she knew it, her hands were moving on their own. A slow, peaceful melody filled the air, a tune she had written years ago when she first learned to play. It was simple but full of feeling, the kind of music that didn't need words to explain itself. The first few notes went almost unnoticed. The executives kept talking, flipping through their papers. But soon one of them looked up. Then another. The room began to shift ever so slightly. The silence that had felt heavy a few minutes ago now felt calm, warm, alive. Lily didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were closed, her body swaying gently with the rhythm. The music flowed like a quiet conversation between her and the room, soft, respectful, but full of meaning. When she opened her eyes again, she saw something she hadn't expected. The man sitting at the head of the table, older, serious-looking with gray hair, was watching her closely. He wasn't angry. In fact, he looked, moved. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time that day, he smiled. The others seemed to relax too. Shoulders dropped, voices softened. Someone chuckled quietly at a small joke. Another took a sip of water and sighed in relief. The tension that had filled the air began to fade away, replaced by something much simpler: calmness. Lily kept playing, unaware that she had just changed the direction of the meeting. The melody floated around the room like sunlight after rain. By the time she stopped, the entire table was silent, not with discomfort, but with appreciation. For a few seconds, no one said a word. Then the older man gently clapped his hands and the others followed. Lily's face turned red. She quickly stood up, whispering, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." But the man smiled and said softly, "Don't apologize. That was exactly what we needed." She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, gave a small smile, and went back to her tray. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the strange, warm rush of emotions she couldn't quite explain. She didn't realize it yet. But in that quiet moment, between clearing tables and following instinct, she had just saved a deal that had been on the edge of collapsing. For the rest of the afternoon, the mood in the restaurant stayed light. The executives talked more openly, even laughing once or twice. The manager stopped frowning. And in the corner, the piano stood still again. But now it felt different. Not just a decoration anymore, but a witness to something extraordinary. When Lily's shift ended, she changed her shoes, tied her coat, and stepped out into the damp evening air. The rain had stopped, and the city lights reflected on the wet streets like gold ribbons. She took a deep breath, feeling tired but peaceful. She didn't think much about what had happened. To her, it was just a small moment, something she did because it felt right. But for the people inside that room, it was the moment that changed everything. And soon, the whole world would know about the waitress who played the piano on an ordinary day and saved a billion-dollar deal without even realizing it. The next morning, the hotel restaurant was quiet again. The chairs were neatly placed, the tables spotless, and the air smelled of freshly brewed coffee. Everything looked normal, just like any other day, but for Lily, something felt different. She had barely slept the night before. Her mind kept going back to the moment she sat at the piano. It had happened so suddenly. She didn't even know what came over her. The sound of the keys, the calm that filled the room, the look on the faces of those important guests. It all kept replaying in her head. At first, she thought she had done something wrong. Maybe she had overstepped her role. Maybe her manager would scold her for touching the piano without permission. But when she arrived for her shift, no one seemed upset. In fact, the atmosphere in the restaurant felt unusually bright. The manager, who usually started the day with a list of complaints, actually smiled at her. "Morning," he said with a nod. She smiled back nervously, waiting for him to mention the piano, but he just told her to start setting up for breakfast service. It almost made her wonder if she'd imagined everything. But around mid-morning, one of the front desk workers came over and said quietly, "Hey, are you the girl who played piano yesterday?" Lily froze, unsure how to answer. Yes. Why?" The woman grinned. "The guests from that big meeting? They were asking about you this morning before they left. Said you changed the whole mood yesterday. One of them even tipped the staff 10 times more than usual." The manager almost fainted. Lily laughed in surprise. "Really?" "Yeah," the woman said. "You must have done something special." For the rest of the day, she couldn't stop smiling. She had never been noticed like that before. Usually people passed her by without even reading her name tag. But now she had done something that people actually remembered. Something that made a difference, even if it was small. Later that afternoon, when things slowed down, she found herself standing near the piano again. The sunlight coming through the window made the black surface shine like glass. She touched the keys softly, remembering the feeling from the day before. For a moment she thought about playing again, just for herself. But she didn't. She was still shy about it. She didn't want people to think she was showing off. Instead, she just stood there for a while, lost in thought. She had always believed music had power, but she never imagined it could reach people in that kind of moment. In a business meeting. Of all places. As the week went on, the story quietly spread among the hotel staff. The kitchen team joked about how the piano girl saved $1 billion deal. The other waiters teased her kindly, saying they'd start learning instruments too. Even the manager seemed proud, though he never said it directly. Then one evening something unexpected happened. Lily was finishing her shift when a man in a dark suit walked into the restaurant. He looked familiar, but she couldn't place him at first. He smiled when he saw her and said, "Ah, there you are." She blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "You played the piano during our meeting," he said warmly. "You probably don't remember me, but I was sitting near the end of the table." Lily's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, yes, I remember you. I didn't think anyone would." He laughed softly. "Everyone remembers you. You have no idea how much you changed that day." She didn't know what to say. She stood there, clutching her tray awkwardly. "I came to give you this," he continued, handing her a small envelope. "It's just a thank you note from our team." That moment reminded all of us why we do what we do. You might think it was small, but it wasn't. She took the envelope carefully, still unsure if it was real. "Thank you," she said quietly. He smiled again. "You know, when you started playing, everything in that room shifted. People stopped arguing. They listened. It reminded us that sometimes numbers and contracts aren't everything. Human connection matters too. And you brought that back, and with a few notes, Lily could feel her cheeks warming. I didn't plan it," she said honestly. "It just felt like the right thing to do." "That's what makes it special," he said. "Keep that instinct. It'll take you far." He gave her a polite nod and left, leaving her standing by the piano with the envelope still in her hands. When she opened it later, there was a simple handwritten message inside. "Thank you for reminding us that silence can be broken with beauty, and tension can turn into peace when someone chooses kindness. You helped us more than you'll ever know." It was signed by the two company executives, the ones who had been leading the deal. Lily sat on the bus ride home that night, holding that note in her lap, staring out the window at the lights flickering across the rainy streets. She didn't feel like just a waitress anymore. She felt like she had done something meaningful, even if no one outside that restaurant would ever know. But the world has a strange way of making small moments travel far. A few days later, one of the hotel staff showed her an article online. It was from a local business newspaper. The headline said, "The Lunch That Changed Everything: How a Piano Tune Softened a $1 billion Deal." The article didn't mention her by name, just called her a young waitress. It described how a sudden moment of music changed the mood of a high-stakes meeting that had nearly fallen apart. It talked about the power of calm, and how one simple act of courage turned tension into understanding. At first, she couldn't believe it. She read the article 3 times, her hands shaking. Then she laughed out loud, almost in disbelief. The staff at the hotel congratulated her. The manager even printed out the article and pinned it on the staff bulletin board. "Not bad for a quiet girl," he said with a proud grin. But Lily didn't let it get to her head. She still came in early, still served breakfast, still cleaned tables like before. If anything, she worked harder. She felt grateful, not for fame, but for the reminder that what she loved could still touch people's hearts. One evening, when the restaurant was nearly empty, an elderly woman who had been dining alone stopped her on her way out. "Dear," the woman said softly, "were you the one who played the piano the other day?" Lily nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am." "I was just trying to help." The woman smiled warmly. "Well, you did more than help. I was sitting near the back that day. I didn't know who you were, but I could feel the room change. That's rare. Don't stop doing what you do. Music like that doesn't just fill silence, it fills people." Those words stayed with her long after the woman left. At home that night, she sat at her old upright piano, the one her uncle had given her years ago. It was a little out of tune, but the keys still carried a familiar comfort. She ran her fingers across them and started playing again, softly, the same melody from that day. Her small apartment felt warm and peaceful. She thought about everything that had happened, the meeting, the guests, the newspaper story. But mostly she thought about how strange life could be. One moment you're invisible, doing your job quietly, and the next, something inside you moves, and the world notices. Over the next few weeks, people started visiting the restaurant just to see the girl who played the piano. Some guests asked if she would play again. At first, she was shy about it, but one afternoon she agreed. She played the same tune, and this time, people clapped before she even finished. It wasn't about attention or praise, it was about sharing something real. For Lily, music wasn't a performance. It was a way to connect, to speak when words weren't enough. As she wiped the piano keys after her shift, she smiled quietly. She didn't know what the future held. Maybe she'd finish college, maybe she'd find a small place to play full-time someday. But for now she was content. She didn't need to be famous. She didn't need big stages or cameras. She just wanted to keep doing what she loved, in her own quiet way. And somewhere out there in an office far away, two CEOs still remembered the soft sound of her piano that day, the sound that reminded them that behind every deal, every number and every decision, there are people with hearts still capable of being moved. A few weeks had passed since the day Lily played the piano and changed everything. The hotel had returned to its usual rhythm. Guests coming and going, the hum of voices mixing with the sound of cutlery and coffee cups. But for her, nothing felt quite the same anymore. Every time she walked past the piano, she couldn't help but smile. It reminded her of that one moment when her hands moved on their own and somehow made a difference. She never planned to be noticed, yet somehow, her music had found its way into people's hearts. The story of the piano waitress had quietly spread beyond the hotel. Some guests came just to see her. Others asked if they could hear the song that changed the mood of that famous meeting. She didn't play often, only when the restaurant wasn't busy or when someone asked kindly. But each time she did, something beautiful filled the room again. She didn't think of it as performing. To her, it felt like sharing a small part of herself. One afternoon, while she was polishing glasses behind the counter, the manager approached her with a serious expression. He was holding a letter in his hand. "This came for you," he said, handing it over. "For me?" she asked, surprised. "Hardly anyone ever sent her letters." He nodded. "Someone dropped it off at the front desk this morning. Said it was important." She took the envelope carefully. It had her name written neatly on the front and no return address. The paper was thick and elegant, the kind used for formal invitations. She opened it slowly, curious and nervous at the same time. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Dear Miss, I was one of the people in the restaurant the day you played the piano. I don't usually write to strangers, but what you did that day stayed with me. I'm organizing a charity event next month for a children's hospital. We need someone to play piano for the guests. It would be an honor if you agreed. There will be no pressure, just music and kindness, the same way you shared it that day. If you're interested, call the number below." It was signed with a simple first name she didn't recognize. Lily read the letter twice, her heart beating faster with each line. A charity event? For a children's hospital? She had never been invited to anything like that before. She wasn't even sure if she was good enough. The manager leaned on the counter, watching her. "Looks like someone noticed your talent," he said with a grin. "You should think about it." "I don't know," she murmured, folding the letter. "I'm not a real pianist. I just play," he shrugged. "You played at the right time once. Maybe it's time to do it again." That night, she sat by her old piano at home, staring at the keys. Her fingers hovered above them, but she didn't play. She just sat there thinking. What if she messed up? What if she wasn't good enough for something so important? Then she remembered the faces of the people in that meeting, how the room had gone quiet, how peace had replaced tension. She had played not to impress anyone, but to bring calm. Maybe she could do that again. The next day, she called the number. The voice on the other end was kind and cheerful. "I'm so glad you reached out," the woman said. "We heard what you did, and we think your story fits perfectly with what we're trying to do. The event is small but meaningful. We just want to raise money for the children's wing at the hospital. Nothing fancy, just real heartfelt moments. That's why we thought of you." Lily agreed, though her voice trembled slightly when she said yes. The following weeks passed quickly. Between her shifts at the hotel and her college classes, she practiced every night. Her piano at home wasn't perfect. Some keys stuck a little, and the sound was softer than she wanted, but she made it work. She chose songs that were gentle and hopeful, music that felt like warmth and quiet smiles. When the day of the event finally arrived, she almost didn't recognize herself in the mirror. She wore a simple white dress borrowed from a friend, her hair pinned neatly, her eyes full of both fear and excitement. The event was held in the same hotel ballroom where she worked, but it looked completely different. Soft lights hung from the ceiling, flowers lined the stage, and round tables filled the room. There were guests in elegant clothes, waiters carrying trays, and a small piano placed near the front waiting for her. The manager saw her as she entered and smiled proudly. "Our star is here," he said jokingly. She laughed nervously. "I'm just trying not to trip on this dress." "Don't worry," he said. "You'll do fine. You've done it before, without even planning to." She walked to the piano, her hands slightly shaking. For a moment, she wanted to turn back, but then she noticed something that steadied her heart. In the front row sat several children from the hospital, some in wheelchairs, some wearing colorful hats, all smiling brightly. Their laughter filled the room before the event even began. They looked so full of life, and their joy made her forget her fear. When it was time to play, the host introduced her as a young woman whose music once turned a business meeting into something human. The audience clapped politely as she took her seat. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The melody that came out was soft and full of emotion. The same tune she had played in the restaurant weeks ago, but now it carried something more. It wasn't just about calm anymore. It was about hope, about kindness, about believing that even small acts can reach far places. As her fingers moved across the keys, the room grew still. The sound filled every corner, gentle, peaceful, alive. The children swayed slightly, smiling. Some of the adults wiped away quiet tears. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was warm and full, not empty but complete. Then came the applause, loud and genuine. Lily looked up, blinking back tears of her own. She stood and bowed slightly, unsure how to react. People began to stand, clapping and smiling at her. It wasn't like anything she'd ever experienced before. After the event ended, several people came to speak to her. They told her how moved they were, how her music had touched them in ways they didn't expect. One man said his daughter in the hospital used to play piano before she got sick, and that hearing Lily's music reminded him of her strength. Lily didn't know how to respond to most of it. She just kept saying thank you, her heart full. Later, as she packed her sheet music, the woman who had invited her came up and said, "You have a gift, you know. You didn't just play notes, and you told a story. People don't forget that." That night, as Lily walked home through the cool evening air, she felt a quiet peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The streets glowed under the streetlights, and the sound of the city felt like a gentle rhythm around her. She thought about everything: the restaurant, the piano, the letter, the children. It all seemed connected, like invisible threads tying moments together. When she reached her small apartment, she placed the event card on her table and sat by the piano again. Her fingers touched the keys, and she began playing softly, just for herself. This time, she wasn't thinking about who might be listening. She wasn't thinking about being good enough or doing the right thing. She just played, for the love of it, for the peace it brought her. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying the faint sound of her music into the night. Somewhere in that sound was the same feeling that had changed a room full of executives, lifted the spirits of children, and reminded strangers of what it means to feel something real. And as the notes faded, Lily smiled to herself. Maybe this was what she was meant to do all along. Not to be famous, but to keep bringing small moments of peace wherever life took her. The world could be loud and busy, full of noise and pressure. But every now and then, a quiet melody could remind people to breathe, to listen and to feel again. That night, before going to bed, she looked at her hands, the same hands that once carried trays and now carried stories, and for the first time, she whispered to herself, maybe this is just the beginning. That night, the restaurant was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher and the sound of a few chairs being stacked. The rush was over, and only a few people were left finishing their coffee. She was exhausted but couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier that evening. The sudden applause, the executive's surprise, and the way the old piano had changed the entire mood. It all replayed in her mind like a dream. She didn't even know if she had done the right thing, but deep down, it had felt right. After wiping down the last table, she leaned on the counter, staring at the empty piano across the room. The same piano that she had hesitated to touch for months. It had always been there, collecting dust, a decoration more than an instrument. But that night it had changed everything. She remembered how her hands had shaken when she first touched the keys, unsure if she still had the skill. Yet when the music started, something inside her woke up. As she clocked out, the restaurant manager called her over. He was a kind man, but strict about professionalism. She expected a warning, maybe even a lecture for stepping out of line, but instead he just looked at her for a moment, then smiled. "That was brave," he said quietly. "You might have done more for this place tonight than any of us." She didn't know what he meant, but his tone was genuine. The next morning, she woke up early even though her shift didn't start until noon. Her small apartment felt colder than usual, and as she brewed a cup of coffee, she thought about her parents. Her father used to tell her, music doesn't just fill a room, it changes it. At the time, she never understood what he meant, but now those words made sense. That night at the restaurant, the music had changed everything. When she arrived at work, the air felt different. The restaurant staff was whispering, and the manager looked busier than ever. She noticed two men in suits sitting near the piano, speaking quietly. Something was happening. When she went to the back to grab her apron, her coworker rushed in, eyes wide. "Did you hear?" she said. "Those business guys from last night came back. They're meeting here again." She froze for a moment. "Here? Again?" "Yeah," her coworker nodded. "Apparently something big went down after you played. The owner's been on the phone all morning." She didn't know what to say. She hadn't even played for them, she just played. When she stepped out to serve the table near the window, one of the men looked up. He smiled faintly, then whispered something to the other. She tried to act normal, focusing on her tray, but her stomach twisted with nerves. Maybe they were upset. Maybe she'd embarrassed them. But a few minutes later, one of them stood up and approached the counter. He introduced himself politely and asked if she could step outside for a moment. She hesitated, glancing at her manager, who nodded. Outside, the air was crisp and the man seemed more relaxed than before. He said, "I just wanted to thank you. Last night you might not realize what you did, but that music, it helped us close a deal we've been fighting over for months." She blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "The meeting was falling apart. Tension was high. But when you started playing, everything changed. It reminded us why we were doing it in the first place. It broke the ice." She was speechless. The man continued, "You reminded us that we're human, not just numbers and papers. It's rare what you did. You didn't just play, you connected with people." She didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to her. She'd always seen herself as just a waitress trying to get by. Later that evening, she got a call from her manager, asking her to come in early the next day. She assumed it was about her schedule, but when she arrived, she found the restaurant owner waiting for her. He wasn't someone she saw often. He usually handled things behind the scenes. He greeted her warmly and asked her to sit down. He explained that the executives had called him personally to compliment her. They'd even offered to sponsor a small music event at the restaurant, something to bring in new customers. "They said your music brought something special here," he said. "They want to help us grow." Her heart raced. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That week, things started to change fast. The restaurant began getting more reservations. People came not just for the food, but to see the waitress who played the piano that night. It made her nervous, but also a little proud. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something meaningful. Still, she tried to stay grounded. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to work. But one night, as she was setting up tables, she noticed a woman sitting near the piano, watching her closely. The woman looked like she was waiting for someone. After a while, she came up and introduced herself. She worked in the music industry, she said, and had heard about the restaurant pianist. The waitress laughed softly. "I'm not really a pianist," she said. "I just played once," the woman smiled. "Sometimes once is enough." They talked for a while, and the woman asked if she'd ever thought about performing again. She hadn't. Life had been too busy for dreams. But something in the woman's tone made her wonder if maybe she should. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. At night, she stayed after work, playing quietly while the restaurant was empty. The music made her feel alive in a way nothing else did. Her co-workers would listen from the kitchen sometimes, pretending to clean while secretly enjoying the tunes. Then one evening, the same group of businessmen returned. This time, they brought a few others. They didn't sit in the private corner like before. They asked her to play again, just one song. She hesitated, but her manager gave her a small nod, so she sat down and let her fingers move across the keys. The melody filled the room softly, blending with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of voices. Halfway through, she glanced up and saw people smiling, swaying gently. Some even stopped eating just to listen. It wasn't a grand performance, just simple notes from the heart. But that was enough. When she finished, the room went quiet for a moment, then filled with applause. She looked down, trying not to tear up. She wasn't used to that kind of attention. After everyone left, the manager came up and said, "You know, they said this restaurant helped save a $1 billion deal, and you were the reason it happened." She didn't know what to say. It sounded impossible, almost unreal. But deep down, she realized something. The piano hadn't just changed the meeting or the restaurant. It had changed her. That night, as she walked home under the streetlights, she hummed one of the melodies she'd played. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like just a waitress. She felt like someone who could make a difference, even in the smallest way. The world hadn't suddenly become easier, and her bills didn't magically disappear. But she had rediscovered something she'd lost long ago: her love for music, and the belief that kindness, passion, and timing could shape people's lives in unexpected ways. A week later, the restaurant held a small evening event, their first live music night. She was nervous as she sat at the piano, surrounded by softly lit candles and curious faces. When she began to play, she wasn't thinking about being perfect. She was just being herself, and that was enough. The executives came again, sitting quietly near the back. When she finished, one of them raised a glass and said, "Sometimes the smallest spark lights the biggest fire." Everyone clapped. She smiled shyly, looking down at her hands. She hadn't planned any of this. She had only followed her heart in a moment when everything else seemed still. And that one choice had changed everything, for the restaurant, for those men, and for herself. When she locked up that night, she ran her fingers one last time over the piano keys. It wasn't just an old instrument anymore. It was a reminder of who she was before life got too busy, before dreams were pushed aside. As she turned off the lights and stepped outside, the city felt different. Not brighter, not louder, just more alive. Because for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged exactly where she was meant to be. The restaurant's new live music nights quickly became something people looked forward to. It started with just a few curious guests, but soon word spread through the town. People came not only for the food, but for the feeling that lingered in the air when she played the piano. Her soft tunes seemed to ease conversations, fill quiet spaces, and make people forget their worries for a little while. At first, she didn't understand why people reacted so deeply. She was just doing what she loved, playing from her heart. But something about her story, how a waitress picked up a dusty old piano and changed a business deal, had caught everyone's imagination. Reporters wrote short articles about it, bloggers shared her video, and even local radio stations mentioned her by name. Despite all the attention, she stayed humble. She still worked her shifts like before, cleaning tables, taking orders, and smiling at customers. The piano was just something she did when she had time. But inside she felt something new growing, a quiet confidence. One afternoon, while setting up for the evening, the restaurant owner called her into his office. He looked cheerful, holding a folder full of papers. "You won't believe this," he said with excitement. "The company that closed that big deal, they're hosting a private dinner here next month, and they've requested you to play again." Her heart skipped. "They did?" He nodded. "They said your music reminded them what matters most, connection. They want you to play the same song you did that first night." She felt both thrilled and nervous. It wasn't just another shift anymore. This was special. In the weeks that followed, she practiced every evening after the restaurant closed. Sometimes she stayed long after midnight, playing the same tune again and again, trying to capture the same feeling as that first night. But it wasn't easy. Back then, her playing had come from instinct, from pure emotion. Now, with people expecting something magical, she felt pressure. What if she couldn't recreate that moment? One night, as she sat alone in the empty restaurant, the lights dimmed and her reflection shimmered in the piano's surface. She felt something shift. She realized that maybe she didn't have to chase that same feeling. Maybe she just needed to be honest, to play from her heart again, without fear, without trying to impress anyone. When the night of the private dinner arrived, the restaurant looked stunning. Candles glowed softly on every table, and the air was filled with the scent of roasted herbs and wine. The executives were there, dressed in elegant suits, their laughter echoing through the room. Yet there was also a seriousness about the evening. It was more than just a celebration. Before the dinner started, the restaurant owner quietly told her, "They want you to start playing just before dessert is served. That's when the big announcement happens." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know what announcement he meant, but she didn't ask. She just sat at the piano and took a deep breath. When the time came, she began to play, the same melody that had once filled the restaurant months ago. The notes started softly like a whisper. Then gradually the sound grew warmer, fuller. The chatter in the room faded as people turned toward the piano. Her fingers moved effortlessly now, each note carrying a piece of her story, the struggles, the quiet dreams, the nights she almost gave up. She wasn't thinking about perfection. She was simply speaking through sound. As she played, she noticed the executives exchanging glances. Some smiled, others closed their eyes. By the time she reached the final chord, the entire room had gone still. Then came applause. Not loud, but steady, genuine. The company's CEO stood up and said, "This music represents what this deal truly means: growth, trust, and new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses. The moment felt surreal. She looked around, realizing she had become part of something far bigger than she ever imagined. Afterward, one of the executives came up to her and said, "You know, when you first played here, we were ready to walk away from that deal. But your music reminded us of why we started. It changed everything." She smiled shyly. "I didn't mean to do anything big. I just played." He laughed softly. Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest ripple. That night, after the guests left, she sat by the piano again, this time just listening to the silence it left behind. She felt gratitude, deep, quiet gratitude. But the story didn't end there. A few days later, she received a letter addressed to her. It was from the same company. Inside, there was a handwritten note and an invitation. They were hosting a charity gala downtown, raising funds for children's music programs, and they wanted her to perform as their guest musician. She couldn't believe it. She read the letter 3 times just to be sure. The idea of performing in front of hundreds of people made her nervous, but she also felt an unfamiliar spark inside her. Maybe it was time to take a step forward. When she told her manager, he grinned proudly. "You have to do it," he said. "You'll inspire people." So she said yes. For the next 2 weeks, she practiced every evening. Her coworkers often stayed back to listen, giving her small bits of encouragement. Even customers began to ask about the gala. It was as if the whole restaurant was cheering her on. The night of the event arrived, and the ballroom looked like something out of a movie. Golden lights, elegant gowns, the hum of soft conversation. She stood backstage, feeling her heart beat faster with every passing minute. When they called her name, she took a deep breath and stepped out. The applause was gentle but kind. She sat at the grand piano under the lights, hands resting on the keys, and for a brief moment, she remembered who she used to be, a young girl sitting at her family's old piano. Dreaming of moments like this, she began to play. The melody was familiar, but this time she added new notes, small changes that made it her own. The audience fell silent, completely drawn in. Some people leaned forward, others wiped tears from their eyes. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. She stood up, shaking slightly, and gave a small bow. The host came on stage and said, "That was beautiful. You remind us why music matters. It connects us all." After the event, several people came up to talk to her. Some offered compliments. Others shared stories about how music had touched their lives. One woman said softly, "I lost my husband last year, and your music, it made me feel something again." Thank you. Those words stayed with her long after the night ended. When she got home, she sat on her bed holding the small flower bouquet she'd received from the organizers. She looked out the window and smiled. It felt strange to think that just a few months ago she was clearing tables trying to stay unnoticed. Now people knew her for something she loved, but she didn't let it get to her head. She still showed up to the restaurant the next morning wearing her apron, greeting customers with the same warm smile. Only now there was something different in her eyes, a quiet strength, the kind that comes from believing in yourself again. As weeks passed, she began giving small piano lessons to kids from the neighborhood, using the tips she earned from the restaurant to buy them music sheets. She said it wasn't about becoming great musicians, it was about finding peace and sound. And every night before closing, she played one last song for the empty restaurant. Sometimes her manager listened from the doorway, sometimes no one did, but that didn't matter. The music was her way of saying thank you to the world that had finally noticed her. One evening, as she finished her last tune, the owner walked up with a thoughtful look. "You know," he said, "this place feels different since you started playing. People come here not just to eat, they come to feel something. You gave this restaurant a soul." She smiled softly, glancing at the piano. Maybe it already had one, she said. It just needed to be heard. He nodded, smiling back. Maybe so. That night, as she turned off the lights and stepped into the cool air outside, she realized how far she'd come. Life hadn't given her fame or riches, but it had given her something better, a purpose. And deep inside, she knew her story wasn't done yet. Months had passed since that unforgettable night at the charity gala. Life had slowly found its rhythm again, though it wasn't quite the same as before. The restaurant was busier than ever, and she had become somewhat of a local legend. People would come in from neighboring towns just to see her play. Yet she never treated herself like a celebrity. She still wore the same apron, still smiled at every customer, and still cleaned tables when things got hectic. But deep down, something inside her had changed. It wasn't pride or ego, it was peace. For the first time in years, she felt like her life made sense. Music, which she had once buried under the weight of bills and exhaustion, had come back to her like an old friend. And she wasn't letting it go again. Every evening after her shift, she'd stay a little longer by the piano. The staff would joke about how she and the piano were inseparable. She'd just laugh and say, "It listens better than most people." One quiet evening after the dinner crowd left, she was playing softly when she noticed someone standing near the door. A tall man in a long coat holding a briefcase. He watched quietly until the song ended, then approached her with a gentle smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. She shook her head. "Not at all. The restaurant's closed, but you can sit if you'd like." He took a seat near the piano. "I've heard a lot about you," he said. "I work with one of the companies from that deal, the one your music helped bring together." She smiled shyly. "Oh, that. I still can't believe people talk about it." He nodded. "It's more than talk. That deal created thousands of jobs. It's been called one of the biggest partnerships of the year. And everyone who was there remembers that night. The way the atmosphere changed. The way people suddenly understood each other again. Your music did that." Her hands went still on the piano keys. She didn't know what to say. He continued. "I came here because our company is planning an anniversary celebration and the board wants you to perform. Not as background music, but as the main guest." Her heart stopped for a second. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yes. You." He handed her a small envelope with all the details. She thanked him, though her mind was spinning. After he left, she sat there for a long time staring at the piano. It felt unreal. That night, she walked home slowly under the streetlights, her mind filled with a mix of fear and excitement. She wasn't just playing for a small restaurant crowd this time. This would be a grand stage, a hall filled with powerful people all watching her. But then she reminded herself, she hadn't started playing for recognition. She played because music gave her peace, and if she could give others even a piece of that feeling, that would be enough. The following weeks were full of preparation. The company sent her a formal contract, arranged her travel, and even hired a stylist to help her look the part. It was overwhelming. Her co-workers teased her affectionately, calling her the famous Waitress. The restaurant owner told her, "No matter what happens, remember where you started." "This piano, this place, it's where you found yourself again." She nodded. "I won't forget." When the big night came, she was nervous but ready. The event was held in a grand hall, filled with glittering lights and polished marble floors. Hundreds of guests filled the room, dressed in elegant suits and gowns. Backstage, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She remembered her first night playing in the restaurant, the fear, the uncertainty, the way her hands shook. She remembered how that one spontaneous moment had changed everything. A stage assistant whispered, "You're up." She walked out slowly, the crowd clapping as she took her seat at the piano. For a moment, she looked around the vast room. It was beautiful, but she realized something. It wasn't the fancy stage or the important people that made her heart race. It was the chance to play, to tell a story without words. She started to play. The melody began softly, like the beginning of a quiet morning. Then it grew, lifting higher with each note, full of emotion and memory. Every key she touched carried pieces of her life, the struggle, the small joys, the quiet courage of showing up every day. The room fell completely silent. Not a whisper, not a shuffle. Everyone listened. As the music swelled, she felt tears sting her eyes. She wasn't just playing anymore. She was living through every sound. When she reached the final note, the echo lingered in the hall before fading away. Then came the applause, loud, warm, and endless. People stood up, clapping, smiling, some even wiping their eyes. Afterward, several executives came up to thank her. One of them said, "You reminded us tonight that success is more than deals and numbers. It's about heart." She smiled, humbled. "Thank you," she said softly. Later, as the evening wound down, she stood near the piano, lost in thought. That's when the man who had first invited her came over. "You know," he said, "there's talk about starting a foundation to support musicians who come from small places like you did. We'd like you to be part of it." She was stunned. "Me, what could I do?" He smiled. "Inspire them. Tell your story. Show them that no dream is too small to start again." That night, when she returned to her hotel, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, looking out at the city lights, and thought about everything that had led her here. The late nights, the empty restaurant, the piano gathering dust, until one quiet evening changed her life. She realized that it had never been about fame or luck. It was about courage. The courage to follow a small voice inside her that said, "Play." When she returned to the restaurant a few days later, everyone cheered. Her co-workers had decorated the place with flowers and a small banner that read, "Welcome home." She laughed and hugged them all. It felt good to be back. The restaurant owner walked over and said, "You did it." "You really did it," she smiled. "We did it," she replied. "This place gave me my start." That evening, she sat at the piano again, the same old one that had seen her through everything. She ran her fingers across the keys and began to play a new melody, something soft and full of hope. The restaurant was full, but she wasn't nervous anymore. This was home. As she played, she noticed a little girl standing near the counter, watching with wide eyes. The girl's mother whispered something, and the child shyly approached the piano. When the song ended, the girl asked, "Can I learn to play like you one day?" She smiled warmly and said, "Of course you can. All you need is heart." The girl grinned and ran back to her mother. And in that moment, she felt something deep inside, something that told her that this, right here, was the real purpose of everything that had happened. Not the fame, not the attention, but the inspiration that passed from one heart to another. In the months that followed, she began helping organize small charity concerts for young musicians. She wanted to give them the same chance she had found by accident, and every time she stood before them, she told her story, not to boast but to remind them that sometimes the world notices you when you least expect it. One evening, long after everyone had gone home, she sat alone in the restaurant again. The lights were dim, the chairs were stacked, and only the piano kept her company. She placed her hands on the keys and smiled. The melody she played that night wasn't planned. It was soft, simple, and full of gratitude. The same kind of tune that had once changed everything. As the last note faded into the quiet, she whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to life, for giving her that one unexpected moment that opened a door she never thought existed. The next morning, as the city woke up, the restaurant's doors opened again. Customers came in smiling, asking for their favorite waitress, their favorite pianist. And as she walked past the piano, she couldn't help but run her fingers lightly over the keys. Because that piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a reminder of what happens when you follow your heart, even when you think no one's listening. And in the end, that spontaneous act of music hadn't just saved a billion-dollar deal. It had saved a dream.